While the Glock G22 didn't start this, it certainly contributed to it. My interest in the .40 caliber Smith & Wesson cartridge started with the Springfield Armory XDM40 that ultimately led to the Glock G20 GEN5. Not wanting to stop there, 10mm auto was the next logical step. Springfield Armory XDM 5.25 competition was brought in to handle the cartridge, and which was followed by several 1911-based pistols, and, after much debate with myself, and, after much research, a Glock G20 GEN4 graced the safe. The Glock G20 GEN5 had yet to be introduced, and I felt that I was well served in the 10mm auto arena by what I had on hand. Then, the Glock G20 GEN5 arrived on the scene. Nope. I am not going to do it, I told myself. I knew of the improvements made in the Gen5 Glocks over previous generations. I had the G20 GEN5 and a G26 GEN5, the latter of which replaced a G26 GEN3 that I had sold. I must admit that I did like the improvements in the Generation 5 Glocks. I was steadfast in my belief, however, that the G20 GEN4 was all I needed. The seduction of the Glock G20 GEN5 began while monitoring my favorite YouTube gun channels. The accolades regarding the G20 GEN5 were all over the place. Better this, better that, best 10mm pistol on the market, the best thing since sliced bread. Personally, I like uncut bread, fresh out of the oven, bread that I can tear into with my bare hands like the man that I am. The guttural act of ripping through crust to get to that soft center like an animal after a kill. The plunging of the fresh ripped bread into a plate of roast beef, mashed potatoes, and gravy, then shoveling it into my oral cavity, massaging the periodontal membrane on the way to the upper digestive tract, while titillating the taste buds as the remnants slide out from the side of my mouth, while my hands reach to further devastate that loaf of bread. That was when the maitre d' asked me to leave. Anyway, I took in all the praise for the Glock G20 GEN5 like a man possessed to find the truth. But there was only one way to find the truth, and that would be to compare the Glock G20 GEN5 with the Glock G20 GEN4, and the sacrifice was made. The Glock G20 GEN5 made it home. As far as specifications, I only want to point out the differences between the G20 GEN5 and the G20 GEN4. The first difference is in the overall width of the G20 GEN5. The increase in width of the G20 GEN5 due to the ambidextrous slide lock and release lever. The second difference is the weight of the pistol with an empty magazine. The G20 GEN4 weighs 30.69 ounces as compared to the 30.88 ounces of the GEN5, which may be due to the optics cut in the GEN5 reducing the weight that, as shown, also reduces the weight of the G20 from 39.86 ounces for the GEN4 to the 38.80 ounces of the GEN5. There's not a significant amount of weight difference between the two to even warrant a discussion. There is, according to Glock, a difference in trigger pull weight in newtons that translates to a reduced trigger pull weight of a 0.44 ounce of difference between the GEN4 and the GEN5, with the GEN5 being the lighter of the two. Regardless of this minor difference, the trigger is still typical Glock. In stock form, the sights are typical Glock sights, while most see the greatest change being the lack of finger grooves on the GEN5, and which seems to be the most popular of the GEN5 changes. The one major change, which I will present in the feature segment, is the ambidextrous slide lock and release mechanism. With these in mind, let's dig into Glock's stated features and see if I can agree with them. The G20 GEN5 arrived, and immediately the large grip adapter and a set of XS 3-dot tritium night sights were installed. For the G20 GEN5 to be compared to the G20 GEN4, I had to level the comparison field as much as possible. I believe that we can be consentient on one fact. The G20 is one honkin' handgun. It is a handful of pistol, regardless of what grip adapter, if any, is installed. The second thing that we could agree on is that unlike the 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP versions of Glock pistols, there is no compact model between the full-size and subcompact Glock 10mm family. In the 9mm family, there is the G19. In the 40 Smith & Wesson family, there is the G23. And in the 45 ACP family, there is the G30. I thought long and hard on how I was going to pull this comparison off. After all, plenty of reviewers before me had already addressed the virtues of this pistol. I know, I'll take the improvements stated by Glock for the GEN5 and compare them against the GEN4. Are they really improvements, or is this all a bunch of hyperbole? So, let's get started.
The NDLC finish is exclusive to the Glock manufacturing process and the GEN5 models at this time. The finish increases protection against corrosion and scratching and improves the ability of the pistol to function in degreased or adverse conditions.
Many confuse the gun's metal treatment with the gun's finish. These are two separate terms. A treatment is, for instance, tenifer. Contrary to what many believe, tenifer is not a finish. It is, in fact, a heat treatment, which the gun's steel undergoes, and which hardens the steel and protects it from corrosion, heat, and wear. Tenifer is even effective to a certain water depth. A treatment is applied before the finish. The gun's finish is exactly what it sounds like, the final procedure which the gun undergoes and which ends the manufacturing process. So, please note that NDLC is a finish. A few years back, Glock went with a new finish on the slide. It's called NDLC, nitride diamond-like coating, and it is more attractive and more durable than the original tenifer on the slides. It is still a form of gaseous ferritic nitrocarburizing, aka nitriding. GEN5 barrel also has this NDLC coating, and it is long-wearing and long-lasting.
Flared mag well has a larger funnel for faster, smoother reloads, particularly in high-stress situations where fractions of seconds matter.
I go along with the flared magwell having a larger funnel. Unless I see some stopwatch times, I'll chalk the rest up to speculation.
The Glock Marksman Barrel, GMB, features a more aggressive polygonal rifling with a target-style crown and tighter chamber specs, which delivers improved accuracy.
The GMB is button-rifled, like most barrels are, and as a result the GEN5 guns have been noted to be far more accurate at longer distances. I really wish that I could substantiate that, but I can't, with my testing only done at the combat distance of 7 yards.
An ambidextrous slide stop lever offers increased ergonomics for left-hand shooters and shooting with the support hand.
This is an excellent upgrade. There are many lefties who would prefer a pistol that can be set up for them, or those who prefer an alternative means of operating the pistol should the need arise. Coupled with the reversible magazine button, both left and right-handed operators should be satisfied.
Removal of the finger grooves on the grip allowed for superior grip ergonomics and improved fit for various size hands.
Not having the finger grooves allows the operator to find his or her own grip comfort level, rather than being forced into a grip that might not suit their hand. I have worked with both finger grooves and no finger grooves, and the Glock finger groove spacing works for my hand, but I can also enjoy a firm, full grip without the finger grooves. Let me know in the comments section which you prefer, finger grooves or no finger grooves.
Firing pin safety and trigger spring enhancements enable the trigger housing to endure long-term durability and result in a smoother trigger pull and improved trigger reset.
I get into the trigger operation between the Gen 4 and Gen 5 later in the range time presentation.
Safe Action System safeties disengage sequentially as the trigger is pulled and automatically re-engage when the trigger is released.
This is common to all Glock pistols. Trigger safety is the first safety in the firing sequence. It's incorporated into the trigger in the form of a lever, and when it is disengaged, blocks the trigger from moving rearward. To fire the pistol, the trigger safety and the trigger itself must be deliberately pressed at the same time. If the trigger safety is not depressed, the trigger will not move rearward and allow the pistol to fire. The second safety, the firing pin safety, mechanically blocks the firing pin from moving forward in the ready-to-fire condition. As the trigger is pulled rearward, the trigger bar pushes the firing pin safety up and frees the firing pin channel. If you decide not to fire and release the trigger, firing pin safety automatically re-engages. The final safety involves the trigger bar, which rests on a safety ramp within the trigger mechanism housing. The trigger bar engages the rear portion of the firing pin and prevents the firing pin from moving forward. As the trigger is pulled rearward, the trigger bar lowers down the safety ramp and allows the release of the firing pin. After firing, the trigger bar moves upward and re-engages the firing pin. As the trigger is released, all safeties automatically re-engage.
Enlarged floor plate makes it easier to pull the magazine free of the pistol if it doesn't fall free during a malfunction or reload.
The magazine floor plate does extend a bit further to the front of the grip than does the Gen 4 model, but is still the same at the rear of the grip.
Customizable frame size with backstraps in 2 sizes with beaver tail. The multiple backstrap frame allows the users to change the circumference of the grip to fit their individual hand size.
This is not unique to Gen 5 Glock pistols. It began with select Gen 4 models. G20, Gen 4, and Gen 5 comes with 2 beaver-tailed backstraps. Without a backstrap installed, the grip frame is equivalent to the SF size. Adding the smaller of the 2 backstraps brings the grip size up to the standard grip size. The largest of the 2 backstraps is what I prefer, due to my somewhat long fingers.
High-capacity magazines, depending on caliber and size of the pistol model, are available.
At the time of this video production, there are no alternatives to the provided 15-round magazines for the G20 from Glock. There are, however, alternative magazines through other vendors, such as SGM Tactical 10mm 30-round magazine for the Glock G20 and G29 pistols, ETS Group 10mm 20-round extended magazine for Glock pistols, and the ProMag 10mm 50-round drum magazine for Glock G20 and G29 pistols. With that out of the way, now let's take a look at other features that further separate the Glock G20 GEN5 from the G20 GEN4. This Glock G20 GEN5 is a modular optic system version, whereas the G20 GEN4 is not. The G20 GEN5 MOS comes with one adapter plate that will fit the Trijicon, Ameriglow, and Holocent, except 509 RDS. The G20 GEN4 does not have front slide serrations, whereas Gen5 version slide has front serrations. I like the front serrations. The slide is long enough to get a firm handhold on these serrations, and pulling the slide to the rear is easier because of that. The GEN4 G20 has 2 locking block pins, as compared to the single locking block pin found on the Gen5 version. Well, there you have it, the physical differences between the G20 GEN4 and the G20 GEN5. What is important, however, is a comparison between the performance of these two pistols, so that you can determine if it is worth stepping into the next generation of the G20 or if the Gen4 version would suit your needs. While some will say that the optic capability alone of the Gen5 makes that feature worthy of the Gen5, there are some of us who disregard the optic feature and just want to know if the Gen5 performs better than the Gen4. Is the trigger smoother? Has field recoil increased or decreased? Has accuracy improved or not? Has handling the Gen5 improved over the Gen4, with the removal of finger grooves, improved or not? These were things that I was curious about, but I could not answer them until I took the Gen5 and Gen4 G20 to the range. And that is going to happen next. From the first range days with both the Glock G20 GEN4 and Glock G20 GEN5, here are my observations. Both pistols ran without issue, as expected. No FTFs, no FTEs, no kabooms, no nothing. It was actually pretty boring. The minor differences of trigger pull weights between each pistol did not seem to have an influence on my shooting. Both are typical Glock triggers, and one seems to be as good as the other. Felt recoil and handling is no different between the two pistols. I did like that I could release the slide on the GEN5 with my forefinger of the shooting hand, due to the ambidextrous slide lock and release lever of the GEN5. That could come in handy. I did not miss the finger grooves of the G20 GEN4's grip frame when shooting the GEN5. In fact, I felt that I could get a tad higher on the grip frame of the GEN5 than with the GEN4, but that could have just been me. Both the GEN4 and GEN5 G20 were equal in accuracy, at least in my hands, and at the distance at which I was shooting. At longer distances, perhaps the Glock marksman barrel is more accurate, but I can't prove that at this time. Would I choose one pistol over the other? I'll reserve that for the summary. For now, let's take a short break and I'll tell you about carrying and concealing the G20. Any G20.
There is scant reason to believe that the violent crime situation in this country will improve under the current administration. As citizens, our personal safety depends almost exclusively upon ourselves. We are no longer protected by police in the way we used to be, and may never be again. Lifestyles need to be tweaked accordingly. John Farnham.
As I mentioned in my review of the G20 GEN4, the G20 was never intended to be concealed. It was intended as a duty pistol to be housed in a secure duty holster. For field work, the G20 may be housed in a chest rig or shoulder holster. The Alien Gear Cloak Tuck 3.5 IWB holster for the Glock 20 takes care of both behind the hip and cross-draw carry for the G20, and other Glock pistols of comparable slide width and shorter slide lengths. The Alien Gear Cloak Tuck 3.5 IWB holster comes with enough spacers and adjustment to custom fit the Glock for ease of accessibility to the pistol while retaining the pistol securely. For shoulder carry, I go with the Felco Timeless Rotor Shoulder Holster System with counterbalance. I have several Felco holsters, both in hip, IWB, and shoulder, and have come to trust their holsters. In short, and for me, two holsters can serve the majority of my Glock pistol full and compact size carry needs. Given that my GEN4 and GEN5 G20 have been set up the same with the night sights and large beaver tail grip adapter, and given the upgrades of the GEN5 over the GEN4, and given my impressions between the two during range work, I will say that the G20 GEN5 is better than the G20 GEN4, but only by a small margin performance-wise. I hate to admit it, but I do like the lack of finger grooves on the grip of the GEN5. Does the G20 GEN5 have enough improvements over the G20 GEN4 to warrant purchasing the GEN5 over the GEN4? Now that's a question that requires a subjective answer, or two, or three. If you prefer no finger grooves on your grip, GEN5 would be the answer. If you believe that the Glock 20 GEN5 is more accurate than the GEN4, with the Glock marksman barrel, then go for the GEN5. If you are considering an optic, the GEN5 has the means to do so, whereas the GEN4 does not. I know what you are asking yourself. What did the Range Ronin do? Well, I did feel that the Glock G20 GEN5 had enough improvements over the GEN4 to warrant purchasing it. The GEN4 was traded for another firearm that I needed, or should I say wanted, to review, and I have no need for two Glock G20s. Also, I am considering reviewing a few optics. The G20 GEN5 can provide a platform to do so. If an optic can hold up to the recoil of the 10mm on a considerably fast-moving slide, it can hold up to most anything. Another question that you might have on your mind is, if I were to choose between the Glock Gen4 and Glock Gen5 for a 10mm handgun, which would be a wiser investment? Or if a Glock should even be a consideration, given the many fine 10mm pistols, and even a revolver or two that are available. To answer that question, both G20s would serve you well, and it comes down to your personal preference. Considering that aside from the upgrades that I have already mentioned, the pistol has to fit your needs, wants, and desires. If a Glock is not among your considerations for a 10mm handgun, I have reviewed two others, and I have placed links to my reviews of them in the description. Note that I may be reviewing other 10mm handguns in the future, and they may not be added to the list, as I am a forgetful fellow at times. Well, my shooting friends, I think that I have beaten the bush regarding the Glock G20 GEN5 pretty well, and I should end this thing. More gun and gear reviews are in the mill, and I hope that you will join me in my journey with them. Until we meet again, stay safe out there.